Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. We are from Group 7 and firstly I will introduce myself. My name is Dewi Wardah and I have 4 partners in this group. The first partner is Puja Ananda, the second is Faticha Faradisa, and the third is Imelda Yunaisafitra, and the last is Nayla Maghfiroh. Okay, in this video, we will explain the material about tragicomedy. The material about tragicomedy have 4 sub-chapters. Number 1 is the name of tragicomedy. Number 2 is about early English tragicomedy. The third is Shakespearean tragicomedy. The last is about modern tragicomedy. Before we talk about tragicomedy based on the history from the book, I will give a general definition of tragicomedy. Do you know what is tragicomedy? Tragicomedy is a literary device used in fictional works. It contains both tragedy and comedy. Mostly the characters in tragicomedy are exaggerated, and sometimes there may be a happy ending. After a series of unfortunate events, it is incorporated with jokes throughout the story just to lighten the tone. Okay, and we will continue the definition based on the history from the book about tragicomedy. The tragicomic is the basic pattern of human experience. It fits both the individual's experience of life's daily ups and downs and the human community's broader perception of its own existence. Tragicomic patterns inform human beings' perception of their environment and their most central religious beliefs. The death and rebirth of the year, the dismemberment and resurrection of Dionysus. They are of the essence of Christianity, an insight recognized explicitly in medieval and Renaissance drama. Paul Herneby has suggested that tragicomedy is the most comprehensive genre because its mood is a complex phenomenon from which simple responses to life or drama must be distilled. Not surprisingly, the tragicomedy is constantly merging with one or another of the simpler genres: comedy, tragedy, melodrama, farce, and so on. That may be distilled from it, but they also construct and comprise tragicomedy's own identity as a genre. Tragicomedy is therefore exceptionally difficult to define. Next, the history of tragicomedy would seem to be coterminous with that of drama itself. In the Greek drama, the tragicomic manifests itself in Euripides' ironic tragedies, with happy endings, for example, Alcestis and Ion drama. In the satyr plays that concluded tragic performance, and indeed in the only complete tragic trilogy extant. Another drama in Roman drama, Terence incorporates danger into his comic plots. Medieval and Renaissance playwrights in England and Spain, for example, incorrigibly mingle the tragic and in the comic in a rich variety of ways. And so, tragicomedy proper can boast antecedents in Euripidean, Terentian, and medieval drama, and cognates in such kinds as sentimental comedy, drama, melodrama, savage farce, and so on.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Faticha Faradisa P.A, and my student ID number is 19320070. Here I want to explain the next topic, that is early English tragicomedy. Early English tragicomedy, medieval and Renaissance tragicomedy characteristically combines the danger, but not the death, of tragedy and the happy ending of comedy in such a way that tragic and comic effects moderate one another, and the audience also remains simultaneously aware of both tragic and comic possibilities. In Guarinian tragicomedy allows the audience to participate sympathetically in the character suffering, but avoids disturbing our feeling by inviting us to anticipate the artifice by which the fine difficulty will be resolved. The audience is invited to view the events of tragicomedy from the perspective of both the characters and the dramatists. In the medieval, the drama, the double vision characteristic of tragicomedy is provided by the overlapping of the historical perspective of the character and the eternal perspective of God and of the audience's own knowledge of how events work out. Many plays written between the end of the Middle Ages and the late 16th century continue to mix tragic and comic incident and high and low characters in the manner of the mystery plays, and to produce happy endings out of potentially tragic situations. Mencken in 1470, for the example, alternates farcical and serious episodes and follows the tragic comic pattern of all and redemption. As the protagonist, Mencken is tempted by comic phases, falls into sin, and is redeemed by mercy. Mencken is sympathetic in his entire determination to remain virtuous and pitiable in his despair at having sinned, but traffic feeling is blocked by the extensive farce of the vices, by the presence intermittently throughout the play of mercy, and implying divine control and hope of a happy ending.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Imelda Yunaisafitra, and my student ID number is 19320092. And here I will continue my friend's presentation about early English tragicomedy. So, a few secular plays of the mid-16th century also use this generic label. One example is Richard Edward's Damon and Phidias in 1565, which combines high and low characters and serious and comic incidents and pivots, like Abraham and Isaac and Ayel Pastor Fido on the last-minute rescue from death of a character who offers himself as a willing sacrifice. It's Phidias for his friend Damon. And Damon and Phidias is a moral example of faithful friendship, but in its emphasis on pathos and suspense relief by humor and the reassuring presence of virtuous counselors. Edward this play also clearly foreshadows later developments in tragicomedy. And though much of English Renaissance tragicomedy repeats the medieval pattern of suffering transformed into joy through divine intervention, in the secular tragicomedies of the Renaissance, the providential superstructure is often begun, or it is suggested without necessarily being made explicit and literal. And almost all of English Renaissance drama may be described as meta-theatrical in one way or another. It's meta-theatrically ranged from the fairly unobtrusive use of theatrical imagery to theoretical discussion of drama and plays within plays. And one tragicomedy, however, without benefit of the Guarnian model, clearly illustrates the ease with which providential and artistic design could be acquired in English Renaissance drama is Robert Greene's Scottish History of James I. Despite the title, this play is not historical, and the audience would probably not have surmised the plot in advance.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Puja Ananda M.S with student ID number 19320046. And now I'm going to explain the next slide, that is Shakespearean tragicomedy. Shakespeare's had 4 periods in his life. The first period is when he was apprenticeship, when he was in age 26 to 30. The second period, when he was mastered his art. The favorite one is the romantic comedy drama. And the third period, when he faced problem of evil in the world. And the last period, when he was creating a new drama form, that is tragicomedy or the dramatic comedy, which we will discuss now. Shakespearean tragicomedy characteristic. Shakespeare's tragicomedy usually have improbable and complex plot. Complex plot is defined as one where the change of fortune is accompanied by a reversal or fortune recognition, or both. What this means is that the complex plot shares what the simple plot contains, but adds additional elements to make it more complex. The characters of high social class. It's more like there is contrast between villainy and virtue, love of different kinds at their centers, and a hero who is saved at the last minute after a touch and go experience, and also surprise and treachery. Perhaps you rarely hear about touch and go here, touch and go. If you say that something is touch and go, you mean that you are uncertain whether it will happen or succeed. The Winter's Tale in 1610, which reached a tragic climax, but then lightened to a happy conclusion, and Cymbeline are 2 plays that fit the tragicomical pattern. Though all of the Shakespeare's play in varying degrees and in various ways combine tragic and comic elements, 2 groups of plays integrate tragic and comic effects in such complex ways that the play's meaning depend on an understanding of how their comic and tragic elements work with or against one another. The 2 groups of play here, the so-called problem play or dark comedies and the so-called romance, And a problem is a problem play is a dream of the kind written by Ibsen, and romance is a narrative genre. Applied to drama, romance can only be modal. Thus, Shakespeare laid plays from Chrysalis to The Winter's Tale are romantic tragic comedies. The earlier group, that is, Troilus and Cressida, All's Well That Ends Well, and Measure for Measure, may most simply be described as ironic tragicomedies, though they too utilize romance material and work towards conventionally comic romantic endings. If the ironic tragicomedies are based on and steeped in romance, equally in the romantic tragicomedies are at, at, at times dark and uncomfortable like their predecessors. In fact, worse things happen in the romantic tragicomedies than in All's Wells and Wells and Measure for Measure, yet traditionally it is the earlier plays that have caused greater critical discomfort. In Measure for Measure, for example, no one dies, the major character suffers for only a few days. The Duke's presence assures the audience of a fortunate outcome, and the play ends with multiple marriages, just like Shakespeare's earlier romantic comedies.
So here I'll continue the third topic presentation about Shakespeare's tragicomedy. In The Winter's Tale, by contrast, Mamilus and Antigonus, as well as the mariners, die. Leontes behaves with extreme cruelty to his wife and undergoes a 16 years penance. Hermione loses her son and for 16 years her daughter. The role of presiding genius is more obscurely divided among several characters, and the happiness of the final reunions is muted by memories of loss. The next, The Merchant of Venice can be seen as a tragicomedy. It has a comic structure, but one of the central characters, Shylock, looks very much like a tragic character. The play has a comedy ending with the lovers pairing off, but we are left with test in the mouth of ordeal of Shylock, destroyed by a combination of his own faults and his persecution of the lover who enjoyed the happy ending. And the feeling at the end of the play is neither joy nor misery. And the next, The Tempest. Prospero and his daughter Miranda are betrayed and banished to live on an island by his brothers Antonia and Alonso, king of Naples. The plans when the shipwreck bring Prospero's betrayer in front of him for judgment.
The next is about modern tragicomedy. First of all, my name is Nayla Maghfiroh D.F. My student's ID number is 1932-0165. So, modern tragicomedy sometimes used synonymously with absurdist drama, which suggests that lover is the only response left to the man when he is faced with the tragic emptiness and meaninglessness existence. We can look from the example Samuel Beckett's In Game and Harold Pinter's The Dumb Waiter. And the next from the book The Name in Nature of Tragicomedy by Verna Foster. There are two parts of tragicomedy. The first one, Tragicomedy 1, which is tragicomedy and realism. We have to remember that the dramatic genre particularly associated with realism at the turn of the century was the drama, serious drama that is neither tragic nor comic, often taking the form of problem play. Therefore, it's important to distinguish tragicomedy from the drama as well. In this part, we have an example Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, the story of a little family that is on the verge of losing its inherited estate. As this play is based on an inevitable social change which came with the turn of 20th century, it presents the end of an aristocratic era, blended with tragic and comic elements. The comic elements can be seen in the behavior, humorous aspect, and the lack of responsibility of the characters. We can also look at other examples such as Ibsen's The Wild Duck, Okasi, Juno and the Peacock, and Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. Sorry, number two, Tragicomedy 2, Meta Theater and the Absurd. Martin Aslin, in his seminal work The Theater of the Absurd, and Richard Dutton and John R. in their books on modern tragicomedy distinguish between the two main strands of modern drama: a narrative, political, Brechtian theater, and poetic, metaphysical, absurdist drama, dance, and/or tragicomedy that addresses the spiritual malaise of the post-war years. And the distinction between Brechtian drama and absurdist tragicomedy is not absolute. However, for the former may introduce metaphysical concerns, that the latter may have socio-political implications, especially in specific production. For example, Waiting for Godot, which is not normally thought of as a political play, and as San Quentin as also a classical example. And some of Brecht's own plays, notably Mother Courage and The Good Person of Sichuan, are also tragicomic. Both Brecht's theory, as noted in Chapter 1, and his practice have important implications for tragicomic drama. To ensure that his audience wouldn't simply experience empathy for his character without understanding the social causes of their suffering, Brecht theorized and devised dramaturgical techniques to create disdain from characters with whom you would normally sympathize. So that's all our material about tragicomedy. And if you wanna read more, you can check the book. The title, The Name and Nature of Tragicomedy by Verna Foster. So thank you for your attention. Happy learning everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.